What if the rise of CMG's biggest star wasn't the beginning of a new story, but the final chapter of an old one? When people talk about Yo Gotti today, they usually start with success, billion-stream plaques, industry respect, a powerful label, and a breakout artist who took over the culture almost overnight. But that version of the story skips over the pressure, the silence, and the moments when everything around Yo Gotti felt like it was closing in. Because before GloRilla's rise, there was tension. Before celebration, there was controversy. And before CMG became a movement again, it was under a microscope. For years, Yo Gotti stood as one of Memphis' most influential figures, not just a rapper, but a boss. Someone who built relationships, shaped careers, and represented a certain path out of the city. On the other side was Young Dolph, a symbol of independence and defiance, carving his own lane without asking for permission. Same city, same spotlight, very different philosophies. As their conflict grew, it stopped being just music. The internet picked sides. Fans connected dots. And suddenly, every move Yo Gotti made was being watched, analyzed, and questioned. When tragedy struck, the industry didn't wait for facts, it reacted to narratives. And narratives don't need proof to do damage. That's when the timeline quietly shifted. What looked like a natural evolution for CMG may have actually been a survival move. A reset. A rebrand shaped by pressure no one ever publicly admitted. And right in the middle of that shift stood Yo Gotti, forced to navigate loyalty, image, power, and legacy, all while the world decided what his story meant. To understand GloRilla's rise, you first have to understand what came before it. Yo Gotti's story has always been about control. Control of his career, his image, and eventually, his city's sound. Long before CMG became a powerhouse, Gotti understood something most rappers didn't. Survival in the music industry isn't just about talent, it's about positioning. Relationships mattered. Access mattered. And knowing how to move without burning bridges mattered even more. That mindset helped him rise from Memphis streets to industry boardrooms, turning himself from a local rapper into a respected executive figure. But Memphis is a small city with a long memory, and power doesn't exist in a vacuum. Young Dolph represented everything Yo Gotti wasn't trying to be anymore. Where Gotti leaned into structure, Dolph leaned into independence. Where Gotti built alliances, Dolph built distance. Dolph's message was loud and consistent. Ownership over everything, no middlemen, no bosses. To fans, he wasn't just a rapper. He was proof that you didn't need the industry to win. At first, the tension between them felt like background noise. Memphis had always been competitive. Rappers clashed. Subliminals flew. That wasn't new. But this was different because both men occupied real power. Gotti had CMG and industry ties. Dolph had money, visibility, and a fan base that believed in his independence like a movement. The city didn't just hear the tension, it felt it. As time passed, the subliminals became harder to ignore. Lyrics felt pointed. Interviews felt loaded. Fans dissected every bar, every tweet, every move. Even when nothing was said directly, the silence spoke just as loud. And in hip-hop, silence can sometimes be interpreted as confirmation. What made the situation even heavier was how differently each man was perceived. Yo Gotti was seen as the establishment figure, the one who made it out and aligned himself with the industry machine. Young Dolph was viewed as the rebel, the one who refused to play the game. That contrast turned a personal conflict into a philosophical one. Fans weren't just choosing sides between two rappers, they were choosing between two ideologies. The internet poured gasoline on everything. Every Dolph success was framed as a shot at Gotti. Every CMG win was framed as dominance. Bloggers didn't need evidence, they needed engagement. Rumors traveled faster than facts, and speculation became accepted truth in comment sections. The more people talked, the harder it became for either side to step back without looking weak. For Yo Gotti, that was a dangerous position to be in. As a label head, perception isn't optional. CMG wasn't just Yo Gotti's brand, it was the livelihood of artists, producers, and staff. Any narrative attached to his name automatically touched everyone connected to him. And while Gotti rarely addressed the situation publicly, his silence didn't stop the conversation. If anything, it made people dig deeper. Young Dolph, on the other hand, leaned into his image. He spoke openly about independence, about not needing cosigns, about moving differently. To his fans, that honesty felt refreshing. To others, it felt confrontational. And in a city already divided by loyalty and history, that kind of messaging carried weight beyond music. Memphis began to feel split. Not officially, not publicly, but culturally. Conversations changed. Venues, radio, even street-level opinions reflected a quiet divide. And once that kind of division exists, it doesn't stay contained. It bleeds into narratives, assumptions, and worst of all, expectations. Then tragedy struck. Young Dolph's death sent shockwaves far beyond Memphis. The loss wasn't just about an artist, it was about what he represented. Independence, hustle, community investment. For fans, it felt personal. And when emotions run high, logic often steps aside. Almost immediately, the internet began searching for villains. Yo Gotti's name was never officially tied to anything in a legal sense, but that didn't matter online. Years of tension, lyrics, and speculation were suddenly stitched together into a single narrative. Fair or unfair, his name became part of the conversation. And once your name is part of a tragedy's narrative, you don't get to control how people interpret it. This was the moment the pressure truly began. Industry executives don't like controversy they can't manage. Brands don't like headlines they can't predict. And labels don't like situations that force silence instead of promotion. CMG found itself in an impossible position, too big to ignore, too connected to escape association, and too visible to hide. Yo Gotti's silence, once a strength, became a liability. Every move was analyzed. Every appearance felt calculated. Even moments unrelated to the situation were reframed through the lens of the past. Interviews avoided certain topics. Conversations became carefully managed. Behind the scenes, decisions were being made not just about music, but about survival. This wasn't just about grief or controversy anymore. It was about long-term damage. Yo Gotti had spent years building CMG into a brand that stood for success, opportunity, and upward mobility. Now, whether he liked it or not, that brand was being tested by public opinion. And public opinion doesn't wait for court documents or official statements. It moves on emotion. The pressure didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere at once. Fans demanded answers that couldn't be given. Media pushed narratives that couldn't be corrected. The industry watched closely, not necessarily to judge, but to decide how to proceed. Partnerships become cautious in moments like this. Opportunities quietly pause. And through it all, Yo Gotti had to do what he'd always done: move strategically. Because reacting emotionally would only feed the fire. Speaking recklessly could make things worse. Doing nothing at all could let the narrative harden permanently. The only option left was evolution. What most people didn't realize at the time was that CMG was already approaching a crossroads. The label needed a new story, not to erase the past, but to change the direction of the conversation. Something that shifted attention without directly addressing controversy. Something organic enough to feel real, but powerful enough to reshape perception. That shift wouldn't come from statements or interviews. It would come from music. And from a new voice that no one saw coming. The aftermath didn't explode all at once. It unfolded slowly, quietly, and in many ways, more dangerously than an immediate backlash ever could. When Young Dolph passed, the shock froze everything in place. The city mourned. Fans grieved. And the industry did what it always does in moments like this. It waited to see where the dust would settle. But the dust never really settled. Instead, a cloud formed around Yo Gotti and anything connected to him. No official accusations. No public statements pointing fingers. Just a constant low-humming pressure that followed him everywhere. His name trended alongside conversations it had never been legally tied to, and once that association existed, it became impossible to fully separate fact from assumption in the public mind. For Yo Gotti, this was unfamiliar territory. He had navigated beefs before. He had dealt with controversy, criticism, even setbacks. But this was different. This wasn't something he could rap his way out of. This wasn't a narrative he could flip with a hit record or a clever interview. This was silence working against him. In hip-hop, silence is often interpreted as guilt, fear, or strategy, and the audience decides which one they believe. The problem was that Yo Gotti couldn't afford to speak freely. Any comment could be misinterpreted, clipped, or twisted into something damaging. At the same time, saying nothing allowed others to speak for him. Bloggers, YouTubers, and social media accounts filled in the gaps with theories. Old lyrics were reposted. Past interviews were reframed. Coincidences were treated like clues. None of it required confirmation to spread. It only required attention. And attention was exactly what this situation attracted. Inside the industry, conversations shifted tone. Executives who once spoke openly became more measured. Meetings became more cautious. Even when doors didn't close completely, they stopped swinging open as easily. This wasn't about judgment, it was about risk management. In corporate spaces, perception is currency, and uncertainty is expensive. CMG, as a label, felt that pressure immediately. Artists associated with the brand were now indirectly connected to a narrative they had nothing to do with. Producers, collaborators, and partners had to answer questions they couldn't control. And while nothing publicly fell apart, the energy changed. Momentum slowed. Optics mattered more than output. Yo Gotti was no longer just managing a label. He was managing a situation. The hardest part was that there was no clear path to resolution. There was no court case to wait out. No verdict that could definitively end the conversation. The story existed almost entirely in the court of public opinion, where timelines don't matter and conclusions are rarely revisited. Every move became calculated. Public appearances were limited. Interviews were selective. Social media presence felt more controlled. Even celebration had to be carefully timed. What once felt like confidence now had to look like restraint. Yo Gotti wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting an entire ecosystem built around CMG. Meanwhile, fans began to shift their focus. Some remained loyal, defending him against speculation. Others distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the unanswered questions. And a growing group simply waited, watching to see what would happen next. That waiting is dangerous, because it creates space for new narratives to form. The pressure didn't just come from outside the building. It came from within the culture. Memphis, a city that prides itself on authenticity and memory, doesn't forget easily. Dolph had invested heavily in his community. His presence extended beyond music. Murals went up. Tributes poured in. His legacy became cemented almost overnight, and with that came a heightened sensitivity around anything connected to his story. For Yo Gotti, that meant moving carefully in his own hometown. Even neutral actions could be misread. Silence could be viewed as avoidance. Progress could be seen as disrespect. There was no way to move forward without someone feeling a type of way about it. This is the part of the story most people never see. Not the headlines, but the weight. The constant awareness that one wrong step could permanently damage everything you've built. The understanding that success doesn't shield you from scrutiny, it amplifies it. At this point, Yo Gotti had two options. He could continue moving exactly the same way, hoping time alone would soften public opinion. Or he could redirect the narrative entirely, not by addressing the past, but by changing what the future looked like. The first option was safer in theory, but risky in practice. Time doesn't erase narratives, it solidifies them if nothing interrupts the cycle. The second option required boldness. It required trust in instinct. And it required a willingness to let something new take center stage. Behind the scenes, CMG began to reposition. Not with announcements, not with statements, but with attention. The label started leaning into different energy, different voices, different moments. The goal wasn't to deny the past, it was to stop letting it define every conversation. Yo Gotti understood something critical in that moment. The culture doesn't move based on explanations, it moves based on momentum. If you can give people something new to focus on, they will. But it has to feel real. Forced distractions fail instantly. That's why what came next mattered so much. CMG needed a breakout moment that felt organic. Something that didn't look like damage control. Something that could stand on its own without explanation. And most importantly, something that represented a shift, not just musically, but culturally. At the same time, Yo Gotti's role began to subtly change. He became less visible as an artist and more defined as a curator, a strategist, someone shaping the direction instead of being the center of attention. This wasn't retreat, it was repositioning. Pressure does one of two things to people in power. It either exposes cracks, or it forces evolution. For Yo Gotti, it did the latter. Because while the public debated the past, he was quietly preparing the future. And when that future finally arrived, it didn't look anything like what people expected. When the shift finally became visible, it didn't come with a press release or a dramatic announcement. It came through sound, energy, and timing. Almost overnight, the focus around CMG felt different. The conversations weren't as heavy. The narratives weren't as tense. And at the center of that change was an artist who didn't fit the old expectations of what CMG was supposed to represent. GloRilla didn't arrive as a calculated industry plant or a carefully staged rollout. She came in loud, raw, funny, unapologetic, and most importantly, authentic. Her music didn't sound like it was trying to prove anything. It sounded like it was having fun. And that alone made it stand out in a moment when the culture felt emotionally drained. For Yo Gotti, this wasn't accidental. He had always had an eye for talent, but this decision went deeper than just spotting potential. GloRilla represented something CMG desperately needed, not as a shield, but as a reset. She wasn't connected to old beefs. She wasn't tied to past narratives. She didn't carry the weight of Memphis politics in the same way. Her appeal stretched beyond regional lines and into mainstream spaces that weren't focused on controversy. And when Yo Gotti co-signed her, the reaction was immediate. Suddenly, conversations shifted from speculation to excitement. From questions about the past to curiosity about the future. Media outlets that had been cautious were now eager again. Playlists opened up. Viral moments replaced tense debates. CMG was being talked about for music, not mystery. But what made this move powerful was how natural it felt. Yo Gotti didn't over-explain his decision. He didn't frame it as a comeback or a rebrand. He simply let the music speak. That restraint mattered. In hip-hop, audiences can smell desperation instantly. This didn't feel like that. It felt like alignment. Behind the scenes, Yo Gotti's role became clearer than ever. He wasn't just a boss signing artists. He was a curator of energy. He understood that the culture needed relief. That fans were tired of heaviness. That laughter, confidence, and authenticity could travel farther than aggression ever could. GloRilla embodied that. Her rise was fast, but it wasn't random. The timing was perfect. Social media amplified her personality. Her records connected with women, casual listeners, and hip-hop purists in ways that cut across demographics. She didn't need controversy to be interesting. She didn't need explanation to be understood. And for CMG, that was priceless. As GloRilla's visibility grew, Yo Gotti faded slightly into the background, not disappearing, but repositioning himself. He became the architect instead of the centerpiece. Interviews focused more on the label's future than his past. The spotlight shifted, and with it, the pressure eased. This wasn't about hiding. It was about evolution. Yo Gotti had spent years being the face of CMG. Now, he was allowing someone else to carry the momentum. That choice spoke volumes. It showed confidence. It showed trust. And it showed a willingness to let the brand grow beyond one individual. At the same time, CMG's image softened. The label started to feel less like a fortress and more like a platform. A place where different voices could thrive. The aggressive edge that once defined its perception gave way to versatility. And while critics debated the reasons behind the shift, the results were undeniable. CMG was winning again. Charts reflected it. Social media reflected it. The industry reflected it. Partnerships felt safer. Collaborations felt easier. And Yo Gotti's name, while still associated with power, wasn't carrying the same weight of controversy. But make no mistake, this wasn't an erasure of the past. The Young Dolph story still existed. The tension still lived in memory. The city still remembered. But the culture had something new to focus on, and attention is the most valuable currency in entertainment. Yo Gotti understood that better than most. What made this chapter complex was the balance. On one hand, GloRilla's rise looked like a celebration, a success story, proof that CMG could still break stars. On the other hand, the timing invited questions. Was this a coincidence? A calculated move? A necessary pivot? The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Yo Gotti didn't need GloRilla to distract people. He needed her to represent growth, to show that CMG wasn't frozen in the past, that the label could still shape culture instead of reacting to it. And by allowing her authenticity to lead the charge, he avoided the trap of overmanaging the narrative. He let the culture decide. As GloRilla continued to rise, Yo Gotti's public presence felt more refined, less reactive, more executive. He spoke carefully, celebrated wins strategically, and avoided unnecessary commentary. This wasn't fear, it was discipline. The shift inside CMG wasn't just about music. It was about values, about what kind of energy the label wanted to be associated with moving forward. And that decision would define everything that came next. Because while GloRilla's success gave CMG a new chapter, it didn't close the book on the old one. It simply turned the page. And pages, once turned, don't disappear, they wait to be revisited. Which brings us to where things stand today, and the consequences that never fully fade, no matter how successful the rebrand becomes. Today, Yo Gotti stands in a very different place than he did years ago, but the past hasn't vanished. It has simply settled into the background, shaping how everything moves now. Success didn't erase the story. It reframed it. And that distinction matters, because it explains why Yo Gotti operates the way he does in the present. On the surface, CMG looks stronger than ever. The label has stars, influence, and relevance. GloRilla's rise proved that CMG can still break artists in a fast-moving culture. The business is solid. The brand is recognizable. And Yo Gotti's position as an executive feels cemented. But underneath that stability is a layer of caution that wasn't always there. Yo Gotti doesn't move loudly anymore. He doesn't engage online the way many executives do. He doesn't respond to narratives, rumors, or speculation. He doesn't feel the need to correct the internet. That silence, once misunderstood, now feels intentional. It's the silence of someone who understands that reacting only gives power to stories you can't control. The industry noticed that shift. Executives respect restraint. Brands value predictability. And Yo Gotti has become exactly that. Predictable in the best way. Safe, strategic, measured. He's no longer seen as someone navigating chaos, but someone who learned how to survive it. Still, the long-term consequences of the past linger in subtle ways. CMG's growth now feels more curated. Artists are chosen carefully. Messaging is tightly controlled. The label avoids unnecessary controversy, not out of fear, but out of experience. Once you've seen how fast a narrative can spiral, you don't take optics lightly again. Memphis, too, remains complicated. Yo Gotti's legacy in the city is undeniable. He helped put Memphis on a global stage. He opened doors. He created opportunities. But the memory of Young Dolph is just as strong. And when two legacies exist in the same space, comparisons never stop. They don't have to be spoken aloud to be felt. Murals still stand. Fans still debate. The city still remembers. That's not something Yo Gotti can fix, undo, or control. And maybe that's the biggest consequence of all, understanding that some stories don't have clean endings. They just coexist with whatever comes next. From a cultural standpoint, Yo Gotti's evolution reflects something larger about hip-hop itself. The transition from rapper to executive often comes with a loss of relatability, but in his case, it came with a shift in responsibility. He's no longer just representing himself. He represents a brand, a roster, and a future. That responsibility shows in how CMG presents itself today. The music is still street-rooted, but it's balanced. The energy is confident, but not aggressive. The messaging is aspirational without being confrontational. These choices aren't random. They're the result of lessons learned the hard way. And GloRilla's continued success reinforces that direction. She didn't just help CMG move forward, she helped redefine what forward looked like. Her presence proved that the label didn't have to be trapped by old perceptions. That CMG could be fun, dynamic, and culturally dominant without leaning into tension or controversy. But even her rise came with its own pressures. As CMG's new face, expectations grew. Every move became part of a larger narrative. And Yo Gotti, now more than ever, had to ensure that history didn't repeat itself. That protection isn't visible to fans, but it's felt in how carefully things are managed. The irony is that Yo Gotti's greatest strength today is also the result of his greatest challenge. The conflict, the fallout, the pressure, all of it forced him to mature faster than he might have otherwise. It stripped away the illusion that power alone guarantees control. It showed him that perception can outweigh facts, and that silence can be both a weapon and a shield. That awareness defines his leadership now. Yo Gotti doesn't chase validation. He doesn't need to prove dominance. He focuses on longevity. And in an industry where relevance fades quickly, that mindset might be his biggest win. Still, there's no escaping the question that hangs over the entire timeline. Would CMG look the same today if the conflict with Young Dolph never existed? Would the shift have happened anyway? Would GloRilla's rise have felt as necessary, as perfectly timed, as culturally relieving? Or did pressure accelerate evolution? There's no definitive answer. And maybe there doesn't need to be. What's clear is that Yo Gotti adapted when many wouldn't have. He didn't collapse under scrutiny. He didn't lash out. He didn't let the narrative consume him. Instead, he changed the environment around it. That's not erasure. That's strategy. And it's why, today, Yo Gotti exists in a space few rappers ever reach. Not just relevant, but resilient. Not just powerful, but patient. Not just successful, but aware of the cost that success can carry. The CMG timeline isn't just about beef, tragedy, or a breakout star. It's about how pressure reshapes power. How silence can speak louder than words. And how survival in hip-hop often depends less on talent, and more on timing, restraint, and the ability to evolve when the culture demands it. Because in the end, Yo Gotti didn't just outlast a moment. He learned how to move beyond it. If you've made it this far, then you already understand something most people don't. This wasn't just a rap story. It was a timeline of pressure, power, and decisions that changed real lives, real careers, and an entire label's direction. And stories like this don't end with one video. They keep unfolding. That's why I want to hear from you. Do you think Yo Gotti handled the situation the only way he could? Or do you believe CMG's evolution was always inevitable, with or without the conflict? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments, because the conversations happening there matter just as much as what's said in this video. If this breakdown gave you a new perspective, not just on Yo Gotti, but on how the industry really works behind the scenes, make sure you hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this is the kind of deep, story-driven content people actually want, and it helps this channel reach viewers who are tired of surface-level takes. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is where you should be. This channel doesn't chase headlines, it connects dots. We break down timelines, power shifts, hidden consequences, and the moments that quietly reshape hip-hop history. No rushing, no yelling, just context, receipts, and real analysis. There's more coming. The CMG story doesn't stop here. There are still unanswered questions. Industry relationships that haven't been fully explored. Decisions that happened behind closed doors. And artists whose careers were shaped by moments the public never saw. Those stories are next. So turn on notifications. Not because you don't want to miss a video, but because the next upload builds directly on this one. And before you go, share this video with someone who thinks they already know the full story. Because once you see the timeline clearly, it's impossible to unsee how everything connects. This wasn't about choosing sides. It was about understanding how power moves when the spotlight gets heavy. And we're just getting started.